Hi, welcome today. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Cool. And you're from the Netherlands, right?
Yes, I'm raised in Amsterdam. I'm from the Netherlands originally, and my base is here at the moment. But I've been working abroad quite a lot. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Which are the main countries you've been working in?
Now I did my studies on ecology in Colombia in Latin
Mhm.
America, and yeah, I've been working when I was at IUCN in many countries in Latin America, in Europe, uh, but also in Asia and Africa. So
Mm,
and of course I've been in the US for quite often as well. But
okay.
my most of the countries I've been working were in Latin America, like Venezuela, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and in Southern Africa and Asia. Yeah. And now also with Commonland in West Australia, we work there. Yeah, with partners. Yeah.
Cool. And Commonland is the main thing you're working on right now?
At the moment, yes. I
Mm,
founded it in 2013
mm,
after a long period when I was leading IUCN in the Netherlands, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is an umbrella or a union organization of NGOs and scientists and governments, one of the founders of WWF. So I have a track record in conservation and restoration and ag as well.
okay. And
Yeah.
so what were the experiences in conservation that led you to starting Commonland?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think one of the if you want to conserve areas and you need to work with people, of course, because there are people living there, and you need to work in long-term processes and projects. And I think one of the barriers I realized working with vendors and working in projects on conservation was that every now and then you needed to raise funds again and again and again and convince people again and again and again to make sure that these long-term processes were needed. And that you can't do, a 5 years or a 4 years project. You can do a lot, but at the end, it is you need to conserve or protect or restore areas, and that will take decades at least, because there are, you need to change mentalities. You need to make sure that you can organize or identify a new proposition or business cases that will help to the restoration or the conservation. And at the end, you need to change policies, and all that work is will take time, and you need to build trust. And I realized that in the position I had at that time, financing projects, dealing with governments, trying to raise funds with public funding and philanthropists and so on. At a certain moment, I realized I need to change. I need to find a way where I can explain this long-term, more holistic way of working in a way that people understand. And that's why I left IUCN in 2012 to give myself the time to look into that and to come up with a narrative that people would understand and would, help them to set them to action, to work on what we call now integrated landscape management and restoration, or in a holistic way.
Mm.
And
What
yeah.
examples of a conservation effort that you were working on back then that I see you in?
Oh, at IUCN, at that time, when I started there, I led a tropical rainforest grants program. So we were able to fund with public funding from the Dutch government and others to support indigenous people in Latin America, Africa, and Asia in their land tenure issues and their struggle and fights. Also set up a land acquisition fund with public funding, sorry, with private funding of the lottery and others, to make sure that you could support local NGOs acquiring land or by buying it, to make sure that they could protect it, especially corridors, so areas between two protected areas that were vulnerable because of exploitation or development. You could think about oil palm or soy or mining, and then we just bought it. And basically they bought it, and they could manage it as a conservation area. So this land acquisition fund still exists under IUCN Netherlands, and yeah, I think they have more supported, probably more than 100 or even more projects in the tropics of buying small pieces of land while making sure that larger areas will be protected because of access, prohibiting access. It was just still is one of the strategic ways of of conservation. It's not easy, and in many countries it's not possible. But where it is possible, it can be helpful. And of
Mm,
course, you need yeah, it's much better to work in a different way and to get people aligned with conservation and protection and that they support these local NGOs and governmental protected areas. But sometimes you need to do other things.
right.
These things I've done, and also maybe the last thing what is trying under ICN, I've been trying to set up a leadership program with business people, with CEOs, to bring them in touch and have a dialogue with conservationists, local conservationists, or especially indigenous people and local NGOs working in tough circumstances. And we set up for 10 years programs that they could exchange, because the decisions of those large corporates, we're talking about Rabobank or Unilever or Shell, of course, the decisions taken at their headquarters would have a tremendous impact on the people in rainforests and other areas. So the ambition at that time, we did it with McKinsey and Aegon Zehnder between 2005 and 2013, was to create a kind of understanding between those two different entities, and seek for solutions. Uh, There I've learned that it was very difficult to work with corporates, especially listed companies, because they are really so different and their world is so different that their short-termism and shareholder value mechanism is not very well for our planet and the vulnerable ecosystems.
Mm,
So it was good to do it. I've learned a lot. I've learned to, and I've learned also that, in those corporates, there are lovely and wonderful people who really want to do good. But at the end, the decision is made about maximizing return on investment, which at the end will be, have a huge impact on social and natural capital.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you kind of became frustrated with this way of always kind of trying to fight the fires and trying to. So you wanted to do this with a new approach, with this common land approach. And so, was there a particular starting point, or how did you start the common land? Was it find someone else, or was it a very small project at the beginning?
No, first I started with analyzing what was already there, and so I followed two tracks: analyzing what was there in the policy domain, and I found the ecosystem approach, which was a program, or no, let's say principles that were coined by IUCN and WWF at the end of the 90s and endorsed by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, COP5, in Amman in 2000. And it is called the ecosystem approach. And that ecosystem approach always inspired me a lot. But I thought, how can I make that practical? Because it's not practical. There are 12 principles and they're super, holistic and perfect, basically. But to make that practical in the field, with normal people working, in landscapes or ecosystems, that is a major challenge. And so I carefully looked into the ecosystem approach and thought, I need to make that practical with a different narrative. And I tested that narrative then in 2012 by visiting and interviewing farmers and indigenous people and local conservationists on the ground in a lot of countries. So I traveled a lot to places, wealthy countries, poor countries, from India to Turkey, from El Salvador to Ecuador, and from the Netherlands to the UK and the US, and Kenya and Ghana, these places, and South Africa. And I basically asked those people, mostly farmers, two questions. I asked them, what is your biggest frustration and what is your biggest dream? And with the answers to those questions, I realized that there were some words that came back always. And basically three words: losses, risks, and returns. And then I also interviewed investors in London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and New York, institutional investors mostly. and I asked him the same questions. And these three words again popped up again. And then I thought, I need to work with those three words. My narrative to work on large scale landscape restoration needs to be based on these three words, because those are anchor points between different groups. And that's how I started to work with what we call the Four Returns framework, which is not now, yeah, you can say it's not a Commonland framework. I hope it will be a universal framework to be used by everyone. But I started with the losses. And I realized that if you really dig deeper into, I'm an ecologist by training, so I know very much, I know a lot about biodiversity, landscape, tropical agriculture, and so on. I'm a tropical ecologist. So I was carefully looking into what are the characteristics using these words from, if you look at a degraded landscape. So you can look at a degraded landscape from an ecological and hydrological and carbon and whatever point of view. But let's first look at the social point of view. And if you look at the social point of view, what are the characteristics? And I realized that if you bring it down to losses, the first loss is that people leave and they have no purpose anymore because they lost their sense of place and they lost the connection with their place. So the first loss is purpose. And then I realized the second loss is you live in a landscape, in a community, is the community. Look what's happening now in Los Angeles. It is also a community. So they see not only a loss of history because the buildings are in fire, and with the buildings the history is gone and whatever, but they also lose their community. And some people will definitely lose purpose. What's happening? Why I am here? Why am I here? And so on. So those two losses were critical. And the third loss, of course, is the loss, which I'm quite familiar, which is a loss of biodiversity, soil health, water cycles, all these things, the physical environment or the physical components. And the fourth loss is finance at the end, income. So what I did is I characterized the degraded landscape through those four losses, because everyone could relate to those four losses. And I wanted to come up with a narrative and at the end with a framework or with a hands-on mechanism that people would set into action. But therefore you first needed to find a connection with the heart and mind and brains of people. But it started with the heart, because that is the entry point, that is the most deeper, effective and solid one. And that's why I started with the loss of purpose.
Yeah. So when you question people, it's like that sense of loss of community and place, which is not even getting yet to the ecosystem. It's like that is also one of the clues, but it's this universal thing of community and place that everyone was talking about.
Exactly, yeah, and the next level, of course, the ecosystem. If you know how it works. If you start with your own jargon as an expert on about ecosystem, ecology, biodiversity, and all that, payment for ecosystem services, carbon, whatever, people get lost. So you don't want that they get lost. You want them to participate and to get to get bonded or to the storyline and to their own purpose. So that's I realized that the word loss was of tremendous importance, because everyone know, especially if you grow older, most people know what losses means, and trauma or pain or healing and these things, so you can relate to those words. And from that I carefully looked into, okay, if then this degraded landscape is characterized by these four losses, then a landscape under restoration is characterized by four returns, because you need to bring things back. And what kind of things? And I that's why how I structured it in first start about your dream. So what is your inspiration? So return that inspiration, ROI. Of course, you can play a bit around with words. So bring back the ROI, return of inspiration. Maximize the ROI, you could say, if you want to bring the link, if you want to talk to business. Of course, they have a different ROI. I'm aware of that. But the thing is, people understand that. And the second return is, of course, the social coherence, the social capital that you want to return. And the third thing is the return of biodiversity. I called it the return of natural capital or natural return. And the fourth one is is basically return of finance, return of income. So here the economic activity comes back, but in a different way. And with that narrative, I gradually um, could could bring people's attention to what a degraded and restored landscape could be, and I could help them to cut through the complexity and understand that they could do something. So that was the first step. And of course, this is all, I published it and, I put indicators in it. I aligned it with all the content documents I knew at the time, like the ecosystem approach I mentioned to you and others, because there's a lot of work done. But the next level was, of course, if you want to bring back those returns, what do you need to do and where in a landscape? And while most people, including farmers, don't understand well what a landscape is and all the ecological processes and hydrological cycles and whatever are there, and the scale, we are talking about areas, with a minimum size of 50,000 or 100,000 hectares, a watershed, for instance. So what is a landscape? I couldn't explain that through, my own jargon with ecosystems and different ecosystems in a setting and whatever, and a biome or something like that. So I said, okay, let's bring it down to zoning and in a way that people understand what their landscape could look like. So a landscape, and I brought it down to three zones. Three landscape zones, so physical zones, and you can put them on the map and start talking about it. And basically those three zones where you have a place where you have urban activities and fabrics and processes, plants and whatever, we call that the economic zone. And then you have a place where you have nature and protected areas or places that should be nature, like a steep hill, for instance, and or areas where nothing happens. You call that the natural zone. And then you have a place what's mostly still is chemical or heavily intensive agriculture, but you want to change that in a way to more regenerative activities, regenerative forms of agriculture. Could be plantations, they could be agroforestry systems, whatever. And we call that the combined zone because you combine agriculture or land use with biodiversity. So you make a combination. And that zone is relatively scarce because most of the agriculture, monocultural chemical agriculture, is still in the economic zone. So the economic zone will probably shrink and the combined zone will increase if you want to bring the foreturns back in that landscape. So in that way, I could explain what is needed and project it on a map even with people. But that was not enough because you need another thing, and that is time. And here my frustration, as I explained to you earlier, is we need to move away from project thinking. You need projects in landscape, but you need a long-term process first, where you can do an integrated landscape management planning system well. And I just said, okay, then we need at least 20 years, minimum 20 years. We all know that we probably need more, but because 20 years is something people still understand. It is one generation. And of course, indigenous people think about 7 generations, and I'm very much aware of that. But it's very difficult to start talking with businesses and governments immediately about 7 generations. So I said, okay, minimum 20 years to build a bridge between the 7 generations and moving away from project thinking of 5 or 4 years.
Mm.
So that's how it started.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like there's a lot of things here. So basically, one of the initial things was that there's a lot of sadness and grief, and you have to hold that. And then you want to give them a dream, and you're also trying to explain to them that the eco restoration has to happen on this large scale, 50,000, 100,000 hectares. And so but not everyone gets that. So you try to put it into a language they understand with the zones, and kind of also these different types of returns, both the social and the ecological returns. And then the other thing is that you have to have this long time scale. You can't just, I mean, eco restoration takes some time, and ecological succession and all these things. So you have this whole large framework, and you're trying to bring it to the people. So did you start out with one? Where did you start this project?
So I first saw what I did, the story, I published it first. So I
Mhm.
published it under the IUCN and together with the Erasmus University, Rotterdam School of Management here in the Netherlands, and IUCN in Switzerland. And so I published it to make sure that, I had something written down in a kind of more or less scientific report, referring to all those other things in the policy and ecological domain. And the second thing was, yes, I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it, make sure how to build proof of concept of this thing, and therefore I needed to have people to help me. I had a whole list of countries where this was extremely important because it's important in everywhere. So I was inspired by the Loess Plateau rehabilitation project in China, which I visited several times, and I know people there. I know John D. Liu, who's a good friend of mine, who filmed there from the start in 1994. But China is, of course, a different world with a different, the stakeholder management process is very different there. But the beautiful thing there is that you can, let's say, rehabilitate or restore large areas if you do the right thing. And of course, they still make a lot of mistakes from an ecological point of view, but from a social point of view, they might be better. So there are lots of lessons learned there, and it's big. So I learned a lot looking how they working there and still working there on this long-term process. Um, so when I looked into where is this needed, it's needed everywhere, but where can I start? Then you look into, where do you have good relationship with NGOs and other actors in the field, and countries that you know well. So I wanted to make sure that on my list were countries like the Mediterranean Basin, Spain, um, Australia, um, some countries in Africa. The Netherlands was definitely not on my list, but at a certain moment we included it to my surprise, to be honest, but we can talk about it later. And India. And thanks to the different networks I knew, and I could bring other people on board because I was able to raise funds from some very visionary philanthropists who really supported this whole four returns framework idea. First, a very important funder, a philanthropist here in the Netherlands, and then also others joined. We could start and started in South Africa, where in the Baviaanskloof in Southern Africa, a water catchment of Port Elizabeth, there was already a process going on and a local NGO working in a way similar to what I just described. So we supported them. And in Spain, where we actually found a group of farmers, organic farmers and other actors in a very degraded area between Granada and Murcia, a very large area, where they said, "Yeah, please join us and help us." And we set up together with them. They set up as a new association, a Four Returns Landscape Partnership Association, to do this work. And we started doing it and this all started in 2014, 2013. And yeah, we promised to continue working with them for at least 20 years. And we're looking for funding to build local teams who could bring stakeholders together to sort out the right projects and the mapping and the whole planning in those areas. And we've learned a lot over the last years in those areas. We just recently launched our guidebook based on 11 years of experiences, which I can send you the link. Um, uh, so we've learned a lot. We, yeah, and those lessons learned are now used for many other actors that come to us and come to others who want to use this framework. We are now active in more than 20 countries.
So were the farmers in Spain, in southeastern Spain, were they already talking about doing this project, or did you come in and suggest it, or how did that begin?
So what those groups of farmers, when we met them first, they saw a few things. They saw that climate change was affecting their landscape. the water cycle, the harvest, unpredictable rains and whatever, or no rains. So they already said we need to do something. And so they came together already. And when we started talking to them, we were introduced by an organic farmers movement person there in Andalusia. They immediately had a click. They understood. They really got it after a few days session. They got the framework, and they said, "This is the way forward. This helps us to communicate the narrative, to do the right thing, to understand where to do the mapping, and so on." So it really landed very, very well, and that was super exciting to see. The movement of, let's say, organic and region ag farmers expanded. They started to talk to protected area managers, therefore protected area in that part. They set up and we helped them regenerative ag companies to promote, the almonds and all the stuff and all the products that would came out of that of the countryside, and build further that movement. But I think the most important thing is that they saw that this landscape approach is the next level. They got an understanding of what a landscape is, of what their landscape is. They were starting when we met them. They were talking about different ways of agriculture, which more working with nature basically, and which some of them already did in a very good way. But many of them were not talking to each other, and were not learning from each other. So this whole movement of creating a learning movement within that area, we facilitated that, and we built a small team to facilitate that locally, and we were bringing the right funding to do the right things, but not only from a farmer's perspective, but also from a water cycle and conservation protected area management perspective. And of course we help to establish the link between those two groups, because there's always a lot of tension between conservationists and farmers because of wildlife and whatever. So understanding that that protected area management, restoration of watersheds, regen ag farming, that these things are all connected within a landscape setting, and that producing agriculture projects in the landscape itself and processing it itself will help to get better income, is all part of this whole storyline.
Cool. I'm just trying to imagine what it was like in those first couple of meetings. Was it more you guys giving talks to them, or more you have sitting in a circle and hearing from them, or how did that work?
Yeah, that's that is really nice. Thanks for bringing that question. So first of all, we all, we had a small team of Dutchies and Spanish people who, of course, spoke their language. So I speak Spanish as well, although with a Latin American accent. But what we did is we use a kind of methodology called the Theory U. Maybe you've heard about it. It was designed by. So it's part of our work. Theory U is an anchor point. It's a core element of our work. So we work with the Theory U, and so there's a few things, few conditions. First of all, we brought them together in a not too big group, like 30 people. We paid for the accommodation and everything, and increasingly we also pay now for we compensate farmers if they want to come, because they need to work every day, so you need to compensate their work for if you want to have them on board for a few days. The other thing is that we listened. Part of the theory process is listening, careful listening. So we started the whole day with listening. What are the problems? What's happening? Why are they coming together? Why did they come together to discuss things on climate change or whatever, water or their social problems or their ecological problems? Is there a common denominator? Yes. And then we gradually, thanks to a great facilitator, Astrid Vargas, who helped us to facilitate the process in such a way that we were able to explain what we could offer, and that we were different. We are not consultants. We don't want to buy land. We didn't want to. Because that was the first question: why are you coming to us? what is your interest in this ignored, abandoned landscape where even the government is not very active? You know, well, why are you coming to us? And that was, and we just said, listen, we see your landscape as our landscape. We don't make a distinction between your landscape, our landscape, or another place where we come from. This is one planet, and we want to take care of our planet. It was a good discussion, and so that was in the first part of the process. What was excited was that at a certain moment, we said, you know, we want to work with you in this process for 20 years. And they were flabbergasted. They never heard something before. And of course we couldn't, I mean, we didn't have money for 20 years, so we didn't know what, but the commitment was real. And we are 10 years down the road. And so we have fulfilled the first 10 years. And you can argue about the impact or whatever, we can talk about it at length. But the fact that we were able to establish a trustful relationship, and we still have a trustful relationship despite of the problem you will have always. You know, we could already upfront tell them that if we would walk the path together for 20 years, we would have severe problems between people, because people are people. You always have things and stuff you need to deal with. And the barometer of, you know, the return of inspiration will go down then, because that's the kind of barometer. And if we realize that, we need to bring it up again and take the right measures to bring the inspiration up again. But this will happen. We also told them that, and they we agreed. No, we didn't need to tell them because they knew, is that the ecological environment is tough, and you can't predict things. I mean, we know that climate change will change stuff there, and there might be more rains or no rains or long droughts or whatever. So we need to cope with that. And last but not least, you know, we couldn't make any promise at all, or we couldn't control anything up front. The only thing what we could promise is that we would guide them, and they should guide us in this process. And that is all part of the theory steps that you need to undertake. And yeah, and we were at a certain moment, we were able to find some finance, and we were able to find the process of coming together, identify small projects in those areas where you can start already, and build this whole program out into you know, and a few years later they were able to write down their first integrated landscape management plan.
So in the
and that's all in progress.
When you hear everyone's ideas and getting all the data, there's almost like a sense, there's a point where you kind of collectively come to a realization sometimes. Did that happen in those meetings?
Yeah. It happened. So because one other thing I forgot to mention is that you immediately need to identify some first projects that you can do in that landscape already. So that's what we did, you know, on swales, in keyline swales, bringing ponds back into the landscape, finance a machine bank process so that they could rent machines in those landscapes, started with composting initiatives, drone planting in the protected areas that were degraded with steep slopes. So visible things so that they could see things were happening. But I think the most important thing is bringing people together often, and facilitate those meetings in a constructive and positive way, so that they see each other. It's a huge area. I mean, 1 million hectares. You know, you can drive 1.5 hours from one place to another place. So those farmers don't see each other very often. So you need to facilitate this process. And what we also did is trying to, not we, but they, so we helped them to onboard local city councils. So
Cool.
the local governments. And yeah, it's not easy, but I think it's the only way forward. So we work bottom up. And of course, at Commonland, we keep track on the, let's say, the top-down processes, whether those are the conference of the parties of the different conventions, COP16 of the CBD of the Biodiversity Convention in Cali just recently, or the Land Convention, the Desertification Convention in Riyadh, the Climate Convention. These three things, we follow that process and we bring it in where needed. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's cool to hear. So yeah, in the theory U process, after you kind of come to that, it's good to have this kind of quick project so you're working together kind of in, I guess in business, it's called minimum viable product, like you actually getting something moving, right? So you had the swales and the key line and the drone planting. So were they collaborative projects? Like it was on someone's farm, I assume, but did they come and help with the swales, or is that how it worked?
Yeah, so of course, not always collaborative. Mostly people could do it themselves. We could help them a little bit, or we had a small grant facility, so they could get some subsidies from us, a few hundred euros to do some swaling and whatever on their own farms. We set up also a regen ag company called Almendrahesa to make sure that they could sell their regen ag almonds in a better way, or organic, and that still takes a lot of effort, but it exists now. And the more critical projects are the projects where you need to work with a lot of farmers together or landowners together. For instance, to create an ecological corridor between A and B. Then you need to ask farmers to set aside a piece of land to create that corridor. So before you can start doing anything at all, you are probably for a year busy with convincing people with a map to be part of that corridor, and compensate them when needed, or help them with plants and plantings. So there were several of those, and it still are several of those collaboration projects. One of the fascinating projects in that area is they called it the Return of Inspiration Project. It was their own. They just at a certain moment said, we want to plant. No, let me explain it first. In that area, you have caves and caves with cave paintings. And one of those cave paintings was a painting, and is a painting of a shaman, which was there probably, a few thousand years old. And they were very proud on those paintings. And at a certain moment said, we want to have the cave painting of that shaman extrapolated in a landscape near the highway, planted with aromatic plants. So then they brought people together in some local NGOs together, and one farmer provided with aromatic, one farmer provided the plants, the city council provided the 16 hectares needed to put the cave painting on and plant the trees, according the lines of that painting. So you had at a certain moment, you had a large shaman in rosemary and lavender, as a signal that they were working together, what you could see from the street, or from not from the highway, by the way, but at the end you could see it with the drone, and it was an interesting project that we would of course never think about, but these things pop up and are very inspiring to do. So wherever we can help with these kind of projects, we do that.
Cool. Yeah, that's like a unique local cultural significant project, kind of. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You can find it in the web somewhere on the publications we've got. Yeah. So
were the farmers did they understand, say, these regenerative water ideas, or did some of the farmers have to learn about restoring water cycles, or how did that all happen?
Yeah, I think there are lots of farmers who really understand this super well. Of course, you have in that same landscape, 1 million hectares, which is a quarter of the Netherlands. You still have a lot of activities that are undermining restoration. You have farmers who lease their land to horticultural, broccoli, and so on, farmers who illegally or legally suck the water out with boreholes. All that stuff exists as well. But you also see a growing movement of people who want to get rid of those actors. But that is tough still.
Wait, what was the problem with the broccoli?
No, I mean if you produce broccoli and lettuce in those places with you need to irrigate it and
Mm,
you suck the water out probably with deep boreholes. So the
mm,
question is that landscape the best landscape for the production of these vegetables?
mm,
That's a question mark. The more sustainable production will be almonds, nuts, maybe olives, and maybe wine and cereals. Those are and meat, rotational meat, especially sheep. Then you can find out. So the question is, what are the best products that fits into that landscape? And also, if you look into making it more sustainable and building soil and so on, and then this high intensive chemical vegetable agriculture might only fit in some places, but uh, but it is still a problem there because of it needs a lot of water, and so you need to use all kind of boreholes to make sure that these products are are doing well, and these vegetables are all for export. They go
and
to
why is almonds good? Because doesn't almonds use a lot of water too?
No, these are rain-fed almonds.
Mm,
So it's not like in California, it's rain-fed almonds, and so they can really sustain this climate. And it's a hotspot of almonds where we work. So
mm,
this is the place where you probably have the best organic regenerative almonds of the world with a very good taste. They're not very big and thick. They're, it's a lot about the taste. So so that's so so your question about where was it easy to convince farmers? I think farmers are convinced by other farmers, not by us, not by ecologists and other and experts, or people who think that they are experts. They are experts themselves. They know exactly, not all, but many of those, especially region ag organic farmers, know exactly what to do. But they don't always have the money. It's difficult to get the right price for those almonds and other products. And of course, you have some subsidies under the European system, but also you have perverse subsidies, of course. So you need to find that balance and find the right way to get things done. But increasingly, more and more farmers are now in that region are using keyline swales to catch every drop of water in and bring it into the soil. They use a lot of more. Many of them use polycropping systems now. Many of them are using composting. So and rotational grazing. So increasingly you see a movement of region ag farmers popping up there that want to build a sustainable landscape and want to work together to make that happen, and also understand the importance of corridors, ecological corridors for pollination and water and bringing the water cycle back, creating shade and places where biodiversity can thrive a little bit more. Yeah.
and can you and how did people move away from this illegal broccoli thing? Was it more peer pressure from the other farmers? Is that why they
Ooh, this is a tough and political topic because export of these vegetables it's a huge income for Spain. So you have intense areas, especially around Almeria, where they produce basically it's a large place where they produce vegetables for the Northern European markets, for the supermarkets in the Netherlands and Germany and the UK and so on, France. So uh, it is a political topic, and I once joined a campaign against this these vegetable farmers in the area, and you could see the anger of people. They're fed up because they know now more than before. Now they already some of them really. I mean, this is a debate that's going on for quite a while. They know that these farmers or these vegetable growers bring down the aquifer.
Mm,
So, I mean, you can work with hundreds and hundreds of region ag farmers and conservationists to bring up the aquifer, but still, the aquifers are going down. And one of the reasons are those boreholes and yeah, unsustainable practices, irrigation practices, vegetable farming practices. So these, I think, the movement of Alva Law in that area probably will definitely help to get more awareness towards, you know, local but also national decision makers. But the fact that they are working together on soil health, water retention, and all that work is already a major achievement, I think.
Mm.
And
So
and
yes,
yeah,
so like you know, Eleanor Ostrom, that economist, she looked at like the common pool resources, right? So the groundwater is a common pool, and so you
yeah,
have regen farmers increasing that common pool of groundwater, and yet you also have these other people taking it away. And so I think
yeah.
she was trying to say, if you can organize a local community enough, then they kind of create peer pressure, sometimes punitive measures to kind of small punitive measures to kind of nudge people to stop doing those things that are kind of taking down the common pool.
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
try to apply Ostrom's kind of ideas in your?
Yeah. I know her work, and that's fascinating. She's so right, but making it in, you know, doing it in practice is just is not easy, and it requires a constant attention for this topic. Building up a movement of people in that area that can create that peer pressure, and so you need, but this area is big. There are two water catchments. You know, it's an altiplano with two water catchment, one of the Guadalquivir and one of the Segura Rio. So uh, and the power of the others is massive. You do not only have these vegetable farmers or yeah, lease companies or whatever you call them, vegetable companies actually. You also have the pig farmers and a little bit mining. So these three things all pollute or bring down the aquifer in one way or another. But still, the vegetable industry is in that area is a tough nut to crack. So
Mm,
how to get a regenerative vegetable industry there, and what kind of vegetables do you need? Are you allowed or can you grow without irrigation or with the forms of irrigation that are not too intensive, and build the soil in a way that it really helps to restore that or regenerate that area? That's the question. And yeah, here again, you know, governments are important, laws are important, you know, the fines are important. You know, if you for it illegal boreholes, you know, the fine is just nothing. So water management is critical, especially now also because of, you know, we've seen what happened in Valencia, uh, because of the and a better understanding of the interaction between landscape degradation and climate change effects, with the intense heating of the Mediterranean, the differences now that happen with winds, with the different wind streams, um, that have been able to cause heavy weather events like the Dana event in Valencia. So I think change will come faster now, unfortunately, thanks to these disasters. And we've been briefly talking about LA and but I think the LA fires on Hollywood will have a huge effect at the end also on our work, hopefully a positive effect. And similar things what I see is that similar things will happen in Spain as well. And it might help to change the mentality of governments and local governments towards these um, intensive agriculture vegetable companies.
mm.
You know,
Yeah, yeah. So we
I love veggies, but it's all about the production, of course.
mm. um so we kind of got to get this kind of movement happening in other cities like Valencia and LA and all these like disaster that kind of prevent them. I just want to go back to the. Could you actually give a little bit of a sense of that landscape, what an altiplano is, and what is happening in that landscape and the water issues in that southeastern Spain area?
Yeah, no, I'm not an hydrologist like an expert like you are, but of course the altiplano is like 1,000 meters altitude. You have to, as I said, you have two water catchments, and the annual rainfall is going down from it's in between 200, 300, sometimes less. It really depends where you are, and it can come, most of the summer is very hot, so you have a growing. So the growth season is in spring and in autumn. Most of the agriculture productivity are almonds, a little bit of olives, wine, and cereals, and meat, as mentioned. Um, the population is relatively low. I think it's like 150,000. They're not very big cities in between. You have Murcia on the one side and Granada on the other side, but they're not part of the Altiplano. So in the area itself, you have some small cities and villages. Um, the area has been abandoned over the last decades. Youngsters moved away to cities. Um, the there's not a lot of tourism. The tourism is mostly at the coastal areas. So it is in a way one of the more forgotten interior places of Spain. Um, the interesting thing is that the people, from a cultural perspective, are they're proud people, very rooted to their environment. They really know what it's all about. They have seen the changes also in the climate changes. The area was partly forested before with holm oak and partly grassland, steppe grassland, esparto grass. We still have large areas of esparto grass there. You probably know that this type of esparto grass was used for espadrillas, the shoes before. But now the esparto grass is not used anymore. Before it was used and harvested for the espadrilla production. But now those grasses are coming from other places in the tropics, mostly Asia. So what you could see there is that, and that's why when we really carefully looked into Spain in 2013, we could see that this area had a huge potential. A huge potential because it is still the hotspot of rain-fed almonds, but also because of the people. The people really wanted to change because they need to change their land use, and they know it. And with they, of course, I knew, yeah, I'm talking about small groups who are convinced but you need to start somewhere. So you need to start with a group of people who already were convinced that they needed to change. And that's why we had and we still have such a good relationship with them, because we are a net, when we enter that area, we are a natural fit. We complemented each other with networks knowledge, and we had a framework that they could understand and use to explain what they wanted to achieve. Yeah, I think that's more or less the protected areas. 60% of the area of the 1 million hectare is protected area. 40% is agriculture and wasteland, you could say, or land that's not used. There is an issue of land ownership, of course. Some of the farmers wanted to sell their farms or have sold their farms or are not using it or are abandoned, and the families live in other places, which is a tough problem. You see it everywhere in the Mediterranean, especially Spain. So land tenure is a real issue. And yeah, in almost every village where we have spoken to the mayor, the aquifer is going down. And of course, there are still some good, strong aquifers in the mountain areas of the protected areas, especially, and they provide water. You can see still part of the ancestral Arabic way of water management. because it was dominated by the Arabs, the Moors, until 1492, when they were kicked out by the Spanish to Morocco. But the water management system they had, in those ages, were really quite well developed. And they had a very good water management system. So the water, so in many places you still have a kind of intact water management system there, but not in many places, but in several places of water distribution. But still, yeah, lots of improvement are needed in those places. Yeah, yeah.
And why is it important to restore the 100,000? That's the scale you're proposing, 100,000 hectares. Like
a million.
Okay, a million. In that, there's a million hectares in that.
Yeah, so the place is 1 million hectares. So 60%, 600,000 hectares is protected. 400,000 hectares is partly agriculture. You have some villages, some infrastructure, and some wasteland, and some esparto land, which is not used anymore. So the question is, we saw that as the Altiplano was one entity. And so you need to have a kind of a understanding of what can you do to build a resilient system, land use system into that one entity of 1 million hectares. And partly is that you need to strengthen the protected area management and look into whether that protected area management is really sustainable. And of course, they're protected area managers working there, so they know exactly what is needed. But of course, this is a question of funds that are lacking, fire prevention. In part of the protected areas were planted by pine trees that actually should change, should be reversed into holm oak trees or other type of vegetation. So all these things need to happen. You have plagues in some of those systems of protected areas, a little bit of tourism, but no one actually was looking from the whole. So what we help to do is to establish looking from the whole. We are talking about holistic landscape management and restoration, and bring the different actors together to come up with a vision on that whole for that entire area. And what do you need to do then? Where do you need to start? Now, we decided we need to start with helping to turn agriculture into more regenerative practices. So with the farming community. On the other hand, we also wanted to have a good conversation with the protected area managers and to make sure that the relationship between the two, the farmers and the protected area managers, was good. And and they, basically they are working on that from the Landscape Association that was created in 2015, and we support them with funding, and we support them with knowledge, and with we working very intensively together with them. But also, so that whole process, that they are part of a landscape, and that landscape is valuable, and that they can restore it, or they can bring back functionality, the ecological functionality, by doing the right things from an ecosystem perspective, and is now taking place. And therefore, our role is to make sure that they continuously can exchange their activities with each other based on a structured approach. That's what we do there. And so you have projects, you have regen ag companies that are starting up. You have support of protected area managers. You have plantings of trees. All these things are happening all together in that landscape, and on the map you can pinpoint it out. Okay, I can send you 2 links of this, so maybe to complement the podcast.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So you have these large-scale projects with these managers of these large lands, and you also have the farmers restoring their land. Both are happening.
Yeah. Exactly. It is a parallel track, and the most important thing, they need to stay in touch with each other to understand the processes within that landscape, because water is a super important part of it, but also plagues, and also culture, food, gastronomy is super important. We published a few years ago a landscape gastronomy guide with local cooks in that area, in Spanish and English, and it was a huge hit because people, of course, people love to eat food from their own environment, and even some we or even we were able to bring TUI, a large tourism company, into the area, and they came with buses with tourists from the coast to visit cooks and restaurants and farmers to understand the landscape approach and the product and eat the products.
Yeah, because
So it's all part of it.
you need the economic flow to the farmers to get, so they
Oh
have.
yeah, yeah, and that's still a tough issue, because if you want to move from a, let's say, a conventional farmer to region ag farmer, yeah, you need to have investments to make that possible, because you will at a certain moment when you are a region ag organic farmer, your cost will go down because you don't need to invest anymore in fertilizers or pesticides. But on the other hand, in between moving from A to B, you are entering a kind of yeah, a valley of death. You need to overcome these processes, and we hope to help them as well in these processes, but not alone, others as well, of course.
Where was that funding coming from?
Most of the funding is coming from public and philanthropy
Okay, from
funding.
Commonland, is that right? Or
Yeah,
from,
and of course we set up some companies, or they set it up. We help them, and some private investors invested in those companies as well. Yeah. So it's at the end it's a blended landscape finance pot that you need to have to make this happen, and increasingly we compare our work with large infrastructure projects, because this is at the end it's a large green infrastructure project, and you need to compare it with a high-speed train between two cities, and the investment needed to create a high-speed train. You're talking about billions, and this is actually we also need to talk about billions if you want to restore a large degraded area and move it from a degraded to a more resilient landscape. And if you bring all the costs, the true price and all the costs into that landscape, if we talk about Valencia or Los Angeles, you're talking about billions. Ask the insurance companies. They know.
right.
Yeah.
What do you think of like Anthony Mayen's? I don't know if you heard of his zero footprint project, where California, Colorado, East Asia, the restaurants there, the guests have an option of 1% tip, and then that goes to a regenerative farm fund.
I think it's excellent. I think all these things are super helpful,
Mm.
from a conscious point of view, awareness point of view, as well as a funding point of view. So, this is we are in a period of transition or transformation, and so the transformation, the disasters will help. Unfortunately, will help with this transformation, uh, because at the end we need to make sure that we pay for biodiversity, and all, let's say, for the ecological functionality of a landscape. We are used over the last decades and centuries to degrade everything what we find on our way, or consume it. But now I think time gradually is moving into a new era that we probably will understand that we need to pay for for the functionality of a landscape or ecosystem, and that through food, through carbon, through water, through all those other services that a more resilient landscape is providing us. And yeah, as mentioned before, disasters will help, and especially disasters in Western countries where insurance companies are fed up with with paying for climate change risks at a certain moment.
So, if people are organizing these large stakeholder things around the world, do you have any advice like how they should start, and also how are they going to try and find funding to kind of do some of the work in that area?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's super difficult to try to find funding. We are talking to philanthropists now and then about this long-term process funding, as we call it, because we have project funding, which is tangible, which is concrete. Swales, water catchment, planting trees, all these things that you can do in landscapes, or protect an area with managers, protected area managers. That is very concrete. But on the other hand, all those projects need to be connected within a landscape setting, and that and someone need to pay for that process of bringing people together constantly, so that they understand and help each other to do the right thing in the right place. And you need to do that for at least 20 years before you can transform a landscape and the mindset of people from A to B. It takes time. Quite often, I say we work with three currencies. One is trust. The second one is ecological functionality or biodiversity. And the third one is time. And no one wants to pay for these three currencies. And we are lucky that we were able to find some philanthropic foundations that understand this and are able to fund these processes. But if you really want to move towards a system where landscapes are becoming sustainable, you need to find actors that want to pay for those processes. And the first one you could say would be governments, because that would be the most logical solution, because they are here. I mean, normally you could say they are here to help us with the commons and to sustain the commons. But increasingly, my opinion is that large companies should pay for these processes as well. And that it would be wonderful if a Coca-Cola or a Unilever or a Cargill would adopt a landscape and say, yes, we pay for those processes for 20, 30 years because we take stuff out of those landscapes. So we are also responsible for making sure that this landscape is climate resilient, social resilient, biodiversity resilient. That means bringing people together to build a sustainable landscape or to maintain or work towards a more sustainable landscape. So far, listed companies are not open for these discussions, although we see a growing awareness with family companies who understand long-term thinking much better than public companies. But my dream would be that public companies massively would onboard this thinking and convince their shareholders that this is the only way forward. You mean their shareholders quite often pension funds and their pensionados, I hope, want to live in a more sustainable and future-proof world. So the case, especially with those climate risks, climate disasters now, and insurance companies are interesting to follow because I foresee that, and I hope that these disasters, especially in the Western world, will lead to more consistent payment for ecosystem services strategy, also for companies. But what is lacking here is our governments that really want to take the lead into this in this. And I'm not too optimistic about the outcomes of so far of the three Rio conventions, the Climate Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, and the Desertification Convention. Although the movement, what I've seen there in those meetings is incredible. There's so many beautiful things happening. So I'm positive and optimistic about what's happening, but I'm not yet too optimistic about the leadership I see with large corporates and governments, because they're all part of this degradation industry. And I know that we are aware of that because that's where we come from over the last few centuries. That's how we evolved.
Tim Coates, this UK banker, has this idea that you could sell flood insurance, say, to an area, and you get the major institutional players and businesses to kind of put up money. So and then use that money to restore the land. So
I think I'm favor of that. Yeah. And I see it coming, already, when the tsunami hit Southeast Asia in 20 years ago, this whole thinking already started, coastal protection, mangroves, and so on. And so yeah, so this is all part of this transformation in which we are at this moment. So I'm positive about all these developments. It is coming, it is happening, and you see it. It's with great initiatives like the one you mentioned, and the other one on food you mentioned, and cooks, and restaurants. This is all part of this wider story that at a certain moment we will pay for ecosystem services. And the only thing is, how can it land into a landscape setting? Because payment for ecosystem services is one, and true price and so on. But you also need to make sure that you do the right thing within a landscape based on ecological thinking and principles within that landscape, and understanding the social construct of that landscape. And that is what we try to do.
So in Alvelau, you integrate the businesses too, right? How does that look like, or what?
Now, we help to set up initiatives like Region Ag companies in that area, which is still a quest. I mean, there are wonderful people working hard to make it happen, and there are several companies setting up there now, like also in other places in Australia, in West Australia as well. We have helped to set up one company is even listed, Wide Open Agriculture in Australia, on Region Ag, especially on lupine. So there are a few issues here, and that is there are a lot of in those areas there are a lot of other companies. So how to find ways to work with those companies that are still on the let's say degradation side of their work, how to help them to move from A to B to be more regenerative and more sustainable. And are those companies as linked or associated to the landscape in which they work, or are they doing other things? And then you have the setting up new kind of companies that work specifically on for regen ag or water or biodiversity. And that's not easy. First of all, we are a foundation, so we are a non-profit organization, and we also sometimes lack the right skill set to help people in the field doing it. Although we have a lot of, we are very well networked, so we can find lots of great people to work there. But on the other hand, sometimes you work in such a remote area that you don't find the entrepreneurial skill set in that area, and people don't want to live there because it's remote and isolated. So there are several challenges we have faced, and we have learned. We've learned our lessons there, and we continue to learn our lessons there. Talking about the case in South Africa, for instance, we were able to set up a distillery plant there, but we also learned there that because we wanted to help the farmers to move away from grazing, goat grazing, towards and move more towards aromatic oil processing. So, and what we've learned there, for instance, is, I mean, we've learned a lot of lessons with them, is that it's all about people. And still, if you have the right people, finally, then you suddenly, and you enter a drought for 5 years, people get stuck and don't trust what you try to achieve anymore, because they need to survive in a period of drought for 5 years, when even COVID hits, and all these things are also happening, which you could not predict and could not foresee. And so these challenges are all part of this chapter, which makes it exciting. And here again, when something like that happens, you just need to again come together, talk and listen to each other. What happened? What were the traumas? Why did it fail? Why not? And how can we move forward? And that is a constant process, and it will help tremendously if we have more patient capital behind us from investment and philanthropy and public funding to overcome these tough periods and move forward while learning from the past.
Mm. When you kind of work in these different bioregional areas, do they form an actual organization in that area, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So in Spain, they have formed an actual organization with a governance model, and then it's an association with a board and a team and so on. In Australia, it is more a network organization. We support a whole process of different organizations, of existing organizations that now work more together. So it is not something like so there the landscape partnership consists of a lot of actors, governmental, scientific, farmers, Aboriginal actors working together in that landscape, including some companies that we've had, as I mentioned, that we helped to set up there. Um, and so the governance model is different everywhere. The dream would be to have one like landscape governance model that could deal with all these things, but that is really difficult because there's so many players around, and there's sometimes also, of course, NGOs competing with each other or other or so it is here again the stakeholder management process, bringing them together and keeping them together and that the beautifying or the sustainability of that landscape is the goal, is the final goal that you want to achieve. I think that is what we've seen also in Australia, but also in other places, including in the Netherlands. That is the how the cement glue that brings them together. But it is you have different government models, and I think that the Spanish government, this what we did with Alvalol, or what they basically did with themselves is an association with a governance model and a membership form is working pretty well. But still there, you find other actors that are not yet a member or not yet part of this process, and you would like to participate, to have them on board as well. So this is something a constant struggle to sort things out. But at the end is what you want to achieve is an integrated landscape plan and implementing that, and who will be part of the implementation. It's all fine. That's if they have the right skill set and we can find the right funding from different sources, the blended funding to make it happen.
And do you include the more industrial farmers, the people who aren't doing regenerative farming, but other types of farming? Do they come into the organization, or do they have to agree to be regenerative, or how does it work if how do they get
No,
in?
they don't need to agree. I mean, in the Netherlands, for instance, we bringing together regenerative and organic farmers, and a lot of them are just conventional farmers, but they all have an interest in soil. So soil is the entry point there, soil and water. And so no, we don't exclude anyone. That would be the most stupid thing you can do, excluding people. It would be wonderful if you could have good conversations in Spain or with those vegetable farmers. And it would be great to have more, large farmers in Australia on board who are conventional. At the end, you want to learn from each other, and that's why this process takes time. Sometimes a conventional farm can look at a regenerative farmer, which is a neighbor for 6 or 7 years before he or she changes anything at all. And sometimes it is just not done to be organic farmer or regen farmer because of a cultural, things. So it really takes time. But
Right.
no, we don't exclude anyone.
So I guess, yes, you bring in conventional farmers, but you have these larger goals like groundwater restoration or river restoration that requires
Yeah.
people kind of change their practice, or it was helpful if they change their practices to achieve these goals.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, if it's, region ag does not mean you are organic. Region ag, you have a whole discussion on, and I can send you an interview I did on regen ag, but you have a whole range of what it means, regenerative agriculture. But basically, it means that you want to work more with nature for better soil health, better water retention, and so on. And yes, it in general, farmers know that they need to bring down the chemical the chemistry, and move more to a natural system. But it does not mean immediately that you need to move, towards organic or biodynamic farming.
Mm.
At the end, we've seen, and especially in Egypt, we've maybe heard of SECAM, which is a biodynamic farm in Egypt, a wonderful organization, a very holistic organization, and they really are doing super well in promoting biodynamic farming in Egypt. They're one of the leaders. They're the leader there. So, but there's a whole range in between, you know.
Are you aware of Milan's work where he was saying that the rain disappeared in Spain because of the land restoration?
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah,
another part of the landscape thing, like you can restore the rain too at these large scales that you're talking about,
yeah,
million.
yeah. No, I'm very aware of that. I posted a thing on LinkedIn when this Valencia thing happened because Milan actually already predicted this, these kind of events. No, I'm very much aware. I remember that I was able to meet him once a few years ago here in the Netherlands when he was here. So he passed away beginning of last year, unfortunately. No, I think his work shows that you cannot ignore the landscape if you talk about climate change and vice versa. And his work also shows us, and the wonderful thing of his work is that as a citizen of Valencia, he was able to observe for decades the changes in the weather patterns, and he could see also the changes in the landscape patterns. So in the landscape, use the land use system. And I think what I see is that many climate scientists forget about ecological realities of a landscape, or they don't take it too seriously, and vice versa. And this is all one system. You have to talk about wind patterns. You have to understand, the evaporation, the soil health, the biodiversity, the vegetation cover, um, of a landscape, and then understand what the climate change effects are of not only about the heating and the amount of CO2, but also the local conditions, in this case of a warmer Mediterranean Sea and cloud formation, to understand what's going on in those landscapes and the effects of all those patterns coming together. So I'm very fond of his work. I think what he did is just very important for the future of our work, not only in the Mediterranean, but also many other places in Latin America. I remember that I once years ago spoke with a hydrologist who has been working in Costa Rica, and there also the clouds formation changed because of intensive lowland agriculture with banana plantations, and that had an effect on the cloud formation, or the lack of cloud formation in the cloud forests higher up in the mountains. And there was a connection between the fact that those clouds were no longer going into the cloud forests, but moving more higher up, and the effect of that for the cloud forest, and for instance on the amphibians in those cloud forests, endemic species. All these
Mm.
things we need to take into consideration. And you know probably a lot about what's happening in the Amazon and the drying up of the Amazon. How can a rainforest dry up? That is because of human interventions and constant clear cutting and so on. So we need to be very careful with these things, and the effect of fires in the Amazon. It's just it's crazy. It's scary.
Mm.
We on the worldwide climate, and we know it. Scientists have been talking about it in an alarming us about this for years now. And
Yeah.
still, those Amazon countries think about, you know, huge and large infrastructure projects in those areas and those lands.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So we really need to raise the awareness of this climate, extreme weather, floods, and droughts, how they're connected to the land, and maybe more money will come in to the movement when this becomes aware, like people realize
Yeah.
need to do this land restoration at large scales. I was wondering, have you had instances of integrating businesses into your regional areas, and some of these businesses then say, hey, they may be getting money from other sources, but say we're going to give you, the farmers and the regen people some
Mhm.
portion of the money we're making because we realize we're in this together with you.
Yeah, now we are talking a lot to businesses, and they're knocking more on our doors and on the doors of many other actors in this field. So that's a good thing, and there are good examples already popping up. So now and then, they're still relatively small, and I'm thinking, but what you see is that because of the risks associated to agriculture, they are becoming more and more alert and interested in this work. We talk a lot with OP2B, which is part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You have several companies that are part of that initiative on biodiversity, like Unilever and Danone and Coca-Cola. And so the ag companies and the water companies are most interested. I mean, we have received funds, of course, from the foundations of some of those corporates. But it would be wonderful, and we have been talking, for instance, to Danone already for several years, and it would be great if they could indeed step into this work, probably first as a funder and off-taker at a certain moment of their products, but then the issue pops up, that those companies are working in the global market, and let's take the example of Spain. If you want to buy almonds and you look into the global markets, you will, you want to have the best bargain, then probably the Spanish almonds are too expensive, and they move. So and that is still a challenge, um, for those companies, but also for the farmers. Sometimes you just cannot go down with the price because there are lots of things that still, the whole services that you provide to the restoration of an ecosystems are not included in that regen ag price if you look into the global market system. And that is the whole true price discussion that makes it difficult, because, yeah, you want to have a company be part of feel responsible for a landscape for at least 5 or 10 years. Then things will move further, because then at the moment you can really see, you can change a landscape for the good, and you can combine the products that you get out of those landscapes and let's say the regen ag products with issues like bringing risks down and calculate the risks, getting carbon better into the soil and pay for your carbon, the social coherence in communities that you help to improve. All the things you need to calculate in that entire landscape and then, so it would not be only one company, it would be a group of companies and governments to move this further. I think that would be the ideal situation, and I'm pretty sure it will happen. And we are trying to prepare the landscape for this moment.
Mm.
Yeah.
So there are two types of businesses. There's the small local businesses, and then there's all these international businesses. So when these farmers start their local bioregional organizations, do they invite in, one, the local businesses, and two, the international businesses?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely, definitely yes. They invite the local ones. In Spain, but also in Australia, you see that, for instance, local family companies buy into this. We have in Spain, for instance, is a local, I don't know how you explain that, almond peel company. They peel the nuts, they break them
Oh,
open, and I don't know how do you call it in proper English. So they are doing this for, this is a family-owned company. They're doing this, and they are part of the membership now, and they are dedicated to be part of this, and they're advocating it as well. So these are, and you have many more of those companies. Also, we've been talking about machines, about composting companies, companies that work on the process of olive oil, wineries. They're all small family-owned companies, SMEs, and they are really very fond of all these developments. We even have hotel companies and tour operators that are part of this, the movement in Spain.
what do
Even
the
a
hotels do?
local. Sorry?
What do the hotels do as part of the movement?
Now, the hotels, so you have, of course, they're in need for people and tourists. They would like to have more people there. So there are several of those hotels that just want to have more people on board, and they see that any movement, any attention for whether that is gastronomy or improvement of the landscape will help them to tell a better story to attract tourists.
Mm,
It means they are interested. The same for a bus company, a local bus company, yeah, or taxi company. It's all about, of course, getting more people into the area because there's a lack of attention for that abandoned area. So that's why they participate. This is the social return and the financial return. I mean, and of course, the more they get into this membership thinking and work, they can tell a better story on the on the biodiversity or the natural return and the inspiration return as well. So
right.
it's an interesting phenomenon that's happening there. You know, the the large companies, the listed companies, as I came, the example of the Danone example, yeah, that really takes much more time. Um, and 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 but yeah, as I said, I'm positive that this will come.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hotels, yeah, they can, if it's more eco-y, then there's actually reason people want to be there. Like I guess Costa Rica restored their forest or kept their forest and so had a lot.
Yeah,
They,
no, but they restored it. Basically they restored it for us. But that was a government decision. That was the Costa Rican government in the 70s, 80s that really was very visionary. And so that was policy. No, in tourism is part. So we have been working with TUI, a large German tour operator in Spain. So that is happening. But if you look into West Australia, there uh, uh, what we see there is that we help to set up a platform on Regen Ag to bring Regen Ag products directly from the farmers to the consumers and restaurants. And also help to set up, as I mentioned, a listed company working on regenerative lupine, which is actually because lupine is a very good source for protein. So it's a good addition to the transformation from animal to plant protein food. And the fact that we started with a company in Australia first, it helped us to get access to the farmers because they understood better the language of a company than the language of a kind of a nature NGO, uh, because that was how it worked there. And now this movement um, existing and also coming together in WA in West Australia is we are playing a minor role there, but hopefully we play a little bit of role of being the glue there, but because there are so many great activities going on there, while it is needed also, because this is a very affected area, dry area, affected by climate change, but deforested area as well. Recently deforested area over the last 100 years. And then
Mm.
even you have an additional issue, which is, of course, the Aboriginal people who have managed these areas for probably 60 or maybe even longer, 60,000 years, in a sustainable, regenerative way, as we would say it now, which was never recognized and understood by white people when they came there. They just thought it was a wasteland, well, yeah, a wilderness, but they had no idea that it was one big garden actually. And so that discussion and that debate is going on, and we hope to support also the Aboriginal community in this perspective.
Mm.
Yeah.
You said one of the costs was actually like bringing in people at the beginning, you know, like kind of having them all sit together. And it seems to me, occurred to me when you said that the hospitality sector actually might be useful in this regards because they're used to, I mean, bringing people together and maybe help convene.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, if we bring them together, we bring them together in a hotel or in a lodge or whatever. So yeah, but we need to pay for it. That's correct.
Right,
So
but they could up the cost of the hospitality sector for all
the,
that.
the hospitality sector, yeah, maybe they I mean, sometimes they will bring down the cost because they understand it and are a member or want to be a partner of this whole process. But still, if you should not underestimate the power of bringing people together in a way that they can co-create a vision for their own landscape, a future-proof vision. That is something very powerful. And because we have the right tools to do that and the right experiences over the last years now, we are becoming an expert in this. And we are actually now setting up a landscape leadership program to help others who are asking for this in these processes in a cluster of landscape in Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, in Southern Africa, in the Casa region, which is the area from Zambia, Zimbabwe, Angola, Namibia, Botswana. We are already active and asked by others, like the big NGOs sometimes, or local NGOs and even governments, to be part in this process and to help them. But then still you have indeed, someone needs to pay for that process. You need to compensate farmers if they leave their farm for 3 days. You need to pay for travel. You need to pay for the accommodation. You need to pay for the facilitators and so on. And you need to pay for the long-term commitment process and guide that process for the years to come. And that should be locally as much as possible and work with local actors. But these people need to have salaries, need to be paid. And we should not underestimate that these costs are essential. We have calculated that only with let's say with €500,000, you can pay for such a process and already do small projects per year to make these things happen. Now, if you compare €500,000 per year for 20 years, which is €10 million and bringing people together in an area of 1 million hectares in Spain or 500,000 hectares wherever. These costs are relatively small compared to the changes that are happening in that landscape. Because at the end, you need investments of billions. We have been talking about Valencia alone, which is a catchment of less than 1 million hectares. You need to have billions to restore that landscape, or better, you need to have millions to avoid that at a later stage you need to pay billions to restore that landscape. And so from a cost perspective, the work we do is very cheap. 100,000 hectares, 500,000 per year, a million hectares. But it is an essential to work together to bring this restoration glue together with people and the right understanding of a landscape to avoid getting into problems later. And you can say, yes, an integrated landscape management plan is easy. I mean, from a government or expert perspective, you just write it down with your computer from on your desk and write an integrated landscape management plan. You need to do this, this, and that, and then you impose it top down into the community. That has been done so often, and it did not work. Only in a country where you have one landowner, like China, or where you have a strong, more authoritarian regimes, it might work. But at the end, there it won't work either, because people have not how do you say that, incorporated them in their own system. So the transformation process did not happen because it was forced. So the transformation process will be possible if you have the right incentives, if you reach people through the heart and head, and at the end it will change into the economic it will improve the economic situation. And that is a process that takes time, because you can plant trees, which you can do now, but to grow trees, it will take decades. And that understanding of the difference between planting trees and growing trees is something that a lot of people unfortunately do not yet get. So
Yeah, this
yeah.
the whole you're saying about if you just try to write a plan and just say everyone do it, it doesn't really work. It's so key to actually get the community buy-in. It almost actually emerges out of them through their
Yeah.
discussions, and then they kind of see, and then the theory U process where there's almost this collective aha, this is what we've got to do. And I think that can be really useful too. I mean, there's multiple ways to grow your bioregional group, but like if you're inviting some of the local businesses, especially ones with bringing in more money, and they're in this collective aha, maybe some of them are willing to put up some of the money while some of the others are doing more of the regen work, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And then I guess once you get to a certain stage, if you're saying you need about €500,000, maybe at that point you have now an entity that kind of has this plan. It makes it easy to apply to different grants or funders.
Oh, yeah. Now that's exactly what happened. Yeah. No, you point the finger on the right thing. This is exactly what happened. So in Spain, in those other places where we work, where we with this integrated landscape management plan, this is what we call the Fortress plan. What you see is that you have a better idea where to do what and what costs associated to doing where what. You need to remove bad dams, or you need to build dams in a landscape, or whatever. All these things you can calculate, and you can specify it and find other resources with specific projects to make that happen. And that is going on now. So all the in those 5 areas where we started in 2014 and so on, you see that they reach out to other funders, that they find other investors, and that there's a growing movement with more activities going on. So that is exactly what we want. So the landscape plan is super important, and that is one of the milestones we work on. And we have a very structured approach to make that landscape plan happen. So we work with the theory U to get the awareness. We work with the zoning to understand where to do what. And at a certain moment, there is a landscape plan, a first version, adopted and endorsed by a group of actors in that area. And with that landscape plan, which they every year or a few years they improve that, and it becomes better and better and more in a more detailed version. That landscape plan is the key door opener to get access to other funds for all kinds of projects, because the landscape plan is actually a map with zoning where you identify exactly what you want to do in the future to get this landscape up and running, and to get a sustainable landscape where the ecological functionality works. So it helps as it is a tool not only for actors in the landscape, but also a tool to get access to funding and communicate it to what you want to do or are already doing it to actors like governments outside the landscape, or funders, or corporates. So it is our role is to enable landscapes to work towards a landscape plan, and also to use the same narratives so that in our landscape leadership program they can communicate among those different landscapes using the same narrative and the same wording, because the framework, and that's what we have learned, is it's all about replicability. It's a replicable thing. You can use it everywhere, which was always the ambition when I started with this work. Uh, I know that, we all know that every ecosystem is different, people are different, cultures are different, everything is different, but there are some generic indicators that you can use everywhere. And that's why I started this podcast with the word loss and the word returns. And I brought it down to 4 losses and 4 returns, and not to 15 losses or 17 returns. But those 4 are enough to make a generic framework, which you can use also in specific areas with specific indicators, while you can translate those specific indicators to the generic indicators. There is a kind of lemniscat, how to say that, that connects the two, the specific indicators for a specific landscape. You can translate it into a generic framework using generic indicators.
Mm.
And that is, I think, hopefully the power, and let's say what we hope is that if people use it, that they can exchange and easily exchange with others and other landscapes or other bioregions or whatever you call it, to strengthen this movement.
Right. And you integrate in these bioregional groups academics too, right? So the academic can help with some of this data and
Yes. Yeah.
ecosystems function and water
Yeah.
function.
Yeah, of course, we work with universities. It really depends where, but in all those areas, we work with universities and academics. They're very much needed, and they like it to be involved. And sometimes we help them. Yeah. Sometimes you need to support them with some funding or whatever. But it's super important that they are part of this process. Yeah,
And they
especially.
probably their equations and then their computer models to actually get a real life project is maybe nice too for them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we work with several universities in Spain, but also in South Africa and Australia and the Netherlands. Yeah. So it's they're in a way they're a stakeholder. Maybe not always in that landscape, but quite often they work in those areas. Like, the University of Murcia or Granada, we have people who are working there and also have a farm, for instance. So they're super important, those people. Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed someone, Sylvia Corta. She's at the La Junquera, but she's also an academic. She does participatory interviews, so it's kind of nice. She's a farmer and a academic.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, La Junquera. Yeah, I mean, we know them, of course, very well. Yeah.
And
No, those.
go ahead.
Sorry, no, please.
Oh, and so if people want to work with Commonland, are you looking for people, or how do they approach you if they want to work with you, or how does that work?
Yeah. So now, first of all, we increasingly we are people approach us for work, and that's lovely. But we only have we have a small team now. I think between 45, more or less 45, 46 people, and in Amsterdam. But then we have those landscape partners, and there are local teams there. Many of them are existing, of course, existing NGOs or existing actors that are working there quite often for sometimes for decades already. So they have their own. I mean, that is not Commonland, but we work with them as partners, and what we see is that there is a lot of interest and more people knocking on our doors and doors of our partners and as other NGOs and actors in this field. So that is really good to see. Also, people coming from the business or the finance world who really are, getting more and more into this topic and want to change jobs. Um, uh, so they approach us and we have vacancies sometimes. On the other hand, what you use, how people come to us, landscape actors also come to us. So those are local NGOs or local landscape actors, could be NGOs or conservation organizations or landscape initiatives that come to us and knock on our door and say, hey, could we work together? Can you help us, or can we find forms of way working together? And you know, we also need to look into yeah, we don't have the capacity to help all those actors yet. So we look into how can we help in a way we can, you know, show the platform, the Fortunes platform that we have. We also work within the Thousand Landscapes Initiative, which is also a platform. So we can bring them to those platforms where they can find more information. But we are now clearly focusing on those clusters of areas that I just described in Southern Africa and in Europe as a starting point. At a certain moment, we definitely also will move into Latin America. We have lots of contacts in Colombia and in Mexico as well, and support groups there as well. And I said in Asia and the Pacific, in the Pacific area. But we need to find a good balance between what we can bring and how we can guide and support, and our own capacity. I mean, we are still tiny compared to many others. And of course, we have ambitions, but we need to find that balance, and that is where we are now. You know, we have strengthened our team. I'm very happy that our team has been strengthened last year by a new managing director, so I can, as a founder, can step away and be more in the content side, the fundraising and the policy work, and doing much more on the policy work now. And she is taking over. She is really taking the lead in building further the team and the organization, which is wonderful. So we work very close together with our management team and with the board. But this is all an organic way of growing, and we also need to protect our own people in a way that they don't get burned down, or how to say burned out because of too much pressure. That's finding that balance is always a critical issue.
Right. So yes, you have more people wanting to work with you than your capacity. So for some of the groups that want to do this work, I guess they can learn from your website, which is commonland.com, I think. And so
commonland.com is important, and also the Fortunes guidebook, which is on the Fortunes platform website. So I can send you the links, and you can add it somewhere. So but through commonland.com and the Fortunes platform, or if they Google the Fortunes guidebook on landscape restoration, they can find it and they can download it. And we also have in the past we did several MOOCs, massive open online courses. They also can find it on that website.
Okay, cool.
And several publications. Yeah.
And you have trainings too for people?
Yeah. So we are now working on a landscape leadership program, which is dedicated for local actors working in the landscape, and we especially in Southern Africa, where we start, as I said, in the Casa region. But we will come back to that the coming years, because it will be one of the key issues that we want to work on. Yeah.
Cool. And then there are 3U facilitation trainings too available, not with you guys, but with other groups that maybe study that and try to facilitate.
Yeah, so definitely you have a very, you have the processing institutes. The processing institute is the institute that is doing the 3U work, and they have the ecosystem leadership program, which is super good to attend. You can find it on the web as well. And then we also are part of the 1000 Landscapes Initiative for 1 billion people. They have a website. So you can also Google them, and yeah, they're all part of this wider network of movement building through courses, learnings, sharing lessons. Sometimes we do webinars as well. So you can find us there on the web, and we are increasingly partner in these conventions, or sorry, in the COPs, as well as in having events to bring this issue more to the forefront of the economy, because that's at the end that we need. That is the part that we need to change and transform.
Cool. And if people in their region want to start this kind of movement, would you suggest, say, inviting 15, 30 people together and then share what your dreams are for the region, your griefs, and then make start kind of working together, or what's the best way for them to start working together in their area?
Yeah, I think the best way is just to look at our website
Hmm.
and also our LinkedIn and YouTube sites and read, get access to the Four Turns guidebook and the publications we did on the Four Turns framework.
Hmm.
Because especially in the guidebook, if you follow that guidebook, the principles and how we work, then you can do this whole process more or less yourself. And of
Hmm.
course, if you need any assistance, you can try to reach out to us. But we are, as I said, our capacity is limited. But still, you know, what we want at the end is that this framework is used by anyone who wants to restore or create a resilient landscape. Those groups are our target groups, bottom up, but also top down. I mean, it would be wonderful if governments would, of course, endorse this. Um, and that's why we have made this publication. I think critical for now for those actors who want to do more is get access to the Four Turns guidebook. It's published in Spanish and in English on the web now. It's free of charge. You just can download it and start just working on it. Do it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I really feel like you guys, Commonland, really is hitting on one of the key things in this whole restoration movement. You're kind of doing something unique, but I think it's like so key and actually should become the one of the central ways we approach things. So I feel like, yeah, I'm very excited to have talked to you and to have got to share a lot of what you're doing.
No, thank you very much for your kind words. I hope we don't raise too much expectations, but it's definitely. I think it is. Yeah, I think it's as one of my colleagues, John Delu, said, this is the great work of our time. So and it will ask from us as human beings a transformational process. And if we don't do it, nature will force us, and we already see that. So I hope many people will join, not only us but all our friends and actors in this field to work on this. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you and to listen to your work as well, and to hear more about yourself and the interesting questions you asked. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.